All right. School personnel and school district liability, all the fun stuff. It should be noted that teachers and administrators are held to a higher standard of care than the ordinary man or woman on the street. The teacher or administrator is under the duty to possess more than the ordinary amount of intelligence in relation to students and their care. And then school as a safe place. Schools are presumed to be safe places where teachers teach and students learn. I think that the way people are interpreting schools and how I guess schools are starting to learn how to function more is that we're kind of moving past and beyond that teachers teach and students learn.
Yeah.
Of course, that's the minimum standard, but I think a lot of schools are going above and beyond that. The prevailing view held by courts is that prudent professional educators acting in place of parents are supervising students under their care and ensuring to the greatest extent possible that they are safe. And I would hope that every educator in the United States is taking that statement wholeheartedly in every single fashion of their job.
Oh, whoops.
Liability of school personnel. School personnel are responsible for their own torturous acts in the school environment. Liability involving school personnel normally falls into two categories: intentional torts and unintentional.
I think that one, if we could you go back to that slide,
Yeah.
but that one I think is really interesting. Um, the, just the fact that that has to be stated in schools. And even in the last year, there have been some court cases and videos that have come out of, again, my focus goes to students with special needs, but there have been some very heinous videos and acts of people doing things to students that is just beyond my thinking. Anyways, go ahead.
I agree.
Well, I was gonna say, I thought it was interesting the level of proof between those two, because the unintentional ones, you don't have to prove anything other than that the act happened, but the unintentional ones, I mean, the intentional ones, you have a higher level of proof required that there was the intent to harm or to um, take away rights in some level.
So the intentional torts is assault, battery, libel, slander, defamation, false arrest, malicious prosecution, and invasion of privacy requires proof of intent or willfulness, whereas simple negligence as an unintentional tort does not require such proof of intent or willfulness. That's kind of what we just talked about. But I know, going on what Jacob said, it is crazy to think that assault, battery, all those things are happening in schools and that we have to state it. But yeah, there are things that do go on.
Vicarious liability. Since school districts are deemed employers of teachers, they also may be held vicariously liable for negligent behaviors of their employees. So, under the old theory of respondeat superior, the master is only responsible for authorized acts of its servants or its agents. And then foreseeability. So, foreseeability is a crucial element in liability cases, especially in cases involving negligence. Foreseeability is defined as a teacher's or administrator's ability to predict or anticipate that a certain activity or situation may prove harmful to a student.
I think that's a case that's super hard, even for an administrator. They'll often say, well, didn't you see it coming? No,
Yeah.
not always. I don't know. I feel like that some of the nicest teachers, people you would say, I would never think they would do that. And then they
I
end
think
up.
part of
100.
that too, like my brain always goes back to special ed, but as a special education teacher, you're working with students that might have intellectual or physical disabilities. So you're always trying to think ahead of what a teacher they have a great activity planned, and hopefully with for some of that foreseeability and communication with general education teachers, you can minimize that harm as much as possible. Because even though they have the best intent, sometimes it's really hard to think of that less than 1% of a population that might be impacted by that activity in a negative way.
Well, and just
Yep.
like students going from room to room, like I'm also a special education teacher, making sure that student is getting from point A to point B and making sure like a para that's taking them, or like you said, within the classroom, that that's not happening as well. It's just there's so many things to look out for and keep an eye on too.
And again, sometimes they have the best of intentions, but luckily that's why they have us to think through some of those things.
I also think that ties really well into your relationships. You can foresee things a little bit better once you get to know your students, and you can tell, oh yeah, they might have a harder transition after lunch because they're tired or whatever. Whereas at the beginning of the year, you don't know any of that stuff, so you can't. It's really hard to foresee what may set somebody off or what may be a problem because you don't really know anybody yet.
Mhm.
Okay, so once this determination is made, there is an expectation that prudent steps be taken to prevent harm to students. Failure to act in this manner may result in liability claims. And
Assault. And assault is this one mine? Or did I
not
skip?
fine.
Oh, sorry, sorry.
That's okay. Assault is an offer to use force in a hostile manner which causes apprehension. The person being assaulted normally must feel a degree of immediacy in the sense that the one committing the assault will execute it promptly and has the apparent capacity to do so.
Now it's my turn, right?
Yes.
A battery has occurred when physical contact actually takes place. In practice, battery is a successful assault. I think the term successful assault is kind of funny. When I was reading through that, I thought that was kind of funny.
Yeah.
A battery involves unwelcome and unprivileged body contact involving another person that is hostile and unlawful. I think that, like, I think of like our policies and procedures, especially when we're talking about like CPI or MANT, whatever type of restrictive intervention that is taking place, and making sure that your policies and procedures are absolutely buttoned up tight when it comes to that. So that way, when you're discussing putting hands on a child, if that ever has to take place, hopefully districts are moving away from that as much as possible, but while keeping everyone safe. It is so important that your policies and procedures are just airtight.
Having re-upped my CPI training last week, um, it's always the last resort and only to prevent harm to the student or someone else. In any other way, you should never be putting your hands on a student.
Absolutely. And then an assault and battery affect teachers, administrators, and students in the school environment. Every person is responsible for his or her own actions in cases involving assault and battery. Even though, like I said, your policies and procedures do permit the use of restrictive interventions, I think the portion of CPI, my wife and I are the instructors, so that's kind of fun that we get to do together. But it stays like it affects the teachers, administrators, and students in the school environment. Even though it's permitted, it takes such a toll on everyone that is involved when you have to use a restrictive intervention.
Yeah.
Like the amount of time it takes to rebuild a relationship, not only with the student but with staff after the case. It's very, very difficult. I can't imagine what it would be like if this was if you had an actual assault and battery case within your school. I think that would be such a difficult situation to navigate.
Defamation. Defamation occurs when false statements are made about another person. These statements generally are ones that tend to harm a person's good name, reputation, or subject the person to hatred, contempt, or ridicule. Certain statements are privileged if made in good faith and within the scope of educators' duty. Therefore, school personnel who expect to be protected by qualified privilege must not make false statements regarding students or colleagues with malice or the intent to harm. Kind of going off what Jacob just said too, I think a defamation case would really harm the relationships in a building, especially, yeah, no matter who they're between, but if you're working with that staff member for the next few years to come, that would be hard to move past.
Now we're going to get into libel and slander. So libel is written defamation, whereas slander is considered oral. Both include statements or communication that result in injury to a person's reputation, good name, or standing in the school or community. So a third party must be privileged to this communication to establish defamation. The burden of proof rests within the person who claims injury based on defamatory statements. So third parties involved as this with well. And like you guys said, Jacob and Lexi, another thing with this, like definitely going to affect your relationships within the school as well.
False imprisonment occurs when a student is detained illegally by the teacher or the principal. False imprisonment is considered to be an intentional tort. I think this kind of goes along with that CPI training too, where this could occur more often than not, I suppose, within a school.
Better have pretty solid proof that that situation could be harmful to students or others.
Yeah. Document. Unintentional torts is a wrong perpetuated by someone who fails to exercise that degree of care in doing what is otherwise permissible. So they act negligently. Negligence is perhaps the most prevalent source of litigation involving injury to students. Negligent. Sorry, go ahead.
Is this back to me already?
Yeah.
Oh, geez. I get to think.
It's okay.
And then I completely forget that it's my turn. Negligence is generally viewed as the failure to exercise a reasonable standard of care, which results in injury or harm of another person. Most negligent cases involve civil wrongs, although there may be instances in which the accused faces both civil and criminal charges. Then your standard of care. Standard of care is an important concept in which, in cases involving liability of school personnel, it requires that the school personnel exercise the same degree of care in which a person of ordinary prudence would exercise under the same or similar conditions.
The standard of care will vary depending on particular circumstances. The level of care due students changes based upon the age, maturity, experience, and mental capacity of students, as well as the nature of the learning activities in which they are involved. Defenses for negligence. If the evidence reveals that persons claiming injury exhibited conduct that fell below a reasonable standard, liability charges against school personnel may be abrogated.
Assumption of risk. This is commonly used as a defense in situations involving various types of contact-related activities, such as your athletics, pep squads, and certain intramural activities. Even though a student assumes an element of risk, it does not relieve school personnel in cases where they fail to meet a reasonable standard of care based upon age, maturity, risk, and nature of risk associated with activity. So when I kind of think of this one, I don't know, like thinking of sports wise, like you have coaches who, might think one of their students has a concussion and continues to play them. Like, I don't know, I think that just goes back to protocols and things we have. So I don't know, that's the first thing that came to mind when thinking about this one.
I was thinking about sports as well, but more along the lines of like the students in high heat, not canceling practices or things when the heat index is super high. And even though they're providing water and breaks, like students are still passing out or getting sick because it's of the heat.
Yep.
All right, comparative negligence. So comparative negligence, acts of those responsible are compared in the degree of negligence attributed to the situation. Juries will normally determine the degree of negligence, which may range from slight to ordinary to gross negligence, depending on the circumstances. And immunity is a legal concept has diminished in terms of its impact. It is based on the old common law of sovereign immunity, such as the king can do no wrong, meaning that the state or federal government is protected from a suit and cannot be held liable for injuries that resulted in the proper execution of the governmental functions.